2 days after Margaret's funeral, I found a key in her coat pocket labeled, "Don't open unless you must." The handwriting was hers, neat, slanted, and deliberate, the kind she used for grocery lists and birthday cards. For a long time, I just stood there in her empty bedroom, listening to the clock tick above the dresser. It was the only sound in the house. Everything else, the laughter, the arguments, the piano she used to play, had stopped. The key was small, brass, cold in my hand. I turned it over like it might whisper instructions if I waited long enough. Margaret never left things undone. She was the older sister, the planner, the one who folded her grief into straight lines. So if she'd hidden something, it wasn't by accident. I slipped the key into my pocket, the label crinkling against my palm. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe. These stories keep us connected, even when life's endings feel like silence. The house still smelled like her, lavender and old books. Sunlight pressed through lace curtains, painting dust into golden snow. I'd promised Ryan and Maya I'd be quick, just a few boxes of papers and clothes before the lawyer took inventory. They thought I was sorting, but really I was looking for closure or maybe for her voice in some forgotten drawer. Margaret's writing desk sat by the window, the same one she'd had since college. I remembered the day she'd bought it, how she ran her fingers over the polished oak, saying, "Every good secret deserves a drawer." She'd smiled when she said it, and I'd laughed, not realizing how true that line would become. The top drawer slid open easily, stationery, stamps, folded receipts, but the bottom one didn't budge. I tugged gently, then harder. It was locked. My hand went to my pocket, to the little key pressing there like a heartbeat. Don't open unless you must. I should have walked away. People say the dead take their secrets with them for a reason, but I'd already buried her once. What more harm could knowing do? I sat down, tracing the grain of the wood with my thumb. The afternoon light had started to shift, gold leaning toward gray. Outside, the first wind of evening stirred the lilacs. I thought of Margaret's last week alive, how she'd seemed distracted, folding napkins at the table, but never quite hearing what I said. There'd been something in her eyes, a waiting. Maybe this was it. The key slid easily into the lock. It fit too perfectly, like it had been waiting all along. I hesitated, part of me half expecting the drawer to resist, the way she used to when I asked questions she didn't want to answer. But it turned smoothly, a soft click that sounded louder than the wind outside. The drawer creaked open an inch, and the smell of cedar and dust drifted out, the scent of years sealed tight. Inside, I saw a folded envelope tied with a piece of blue thread, a small notebook with a worn leather cover, and something glinting faintly beneath them, a second key, smaller than the first, with a tag that read only one word, Maya. For a long time, I didn't move. My sister was gone, yet somehow she was still speaking through paper, ink, and brass. And suddenly, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what she had to say. I stared at that little tag for so long, the words started to blur. Maya. My granddaughter's name, written in Margaret's careful, looping script. The same script that had labeled Christmas boxes and birthday presents for decades. I slipped the smaller key from the blue thread and held it between my fingers. It felt lighter than it looked, almost delicate, like something that belonged to a music box or a diary, not to whatever secret my sister had decided to lock away. Margaret had barely known Maya, at least not the way I did. They saw each other at holidays, on carefully arranged visits where everyone wore their best behavior. My sister wasn't unkind, just reserved. She loved from a distance, as if closeness carried an expiration date. Growing up, I used to think it made her strong. Now, with the drawer open in front of me, I wondered if it had just made her lonely. I lifted the envelope first, On the front, in that same neat handwriting, was my name, Evelyn. No deer, no flourish, just my name, like a fact she couldn't avoid. I ran my thumb under the flap, but stopped short of opening it. Some parts of the past needed a softer landing than others. The notebook lay beneath, edges frayed, the leather cracked along the spine the way old knuckles do. It looked like something she'd carried for years. I set them both aside and leaned back in the chair, letting the house settle around me. The clock on the wall ticked a steady rhythm, the same one that had measured our childhood bedtime, our teenage arguments, and the silence between phone calls as adults. It struck me then how much of my life had been timed to the sounds of other people's homes. When we were girls, Margaret and I shared a room barely big enough for 2 beds and a narrow dresser. She kept her side immaculate, sheets tucked tight, books in lines, pencils sharpened to strict points. My side was a whirlwind of half-folded sweaters and stacks of magazines. She'd watch me hunt for things I'd misplaced and sigh, "Evelyn, one day you're going to lose something you can't replace." "I have you," I'd say back then, all bravado and youth. "You'll remember for both of us." She had. For years, she remembered everything: birthdays, appointments, the way Mother liked her tea steeped, the exact date Father had stopped coming home on Sundays. Margaret carried our history like a ledger, full of neat columns and quiet debts. I was the one who broke rules, fell in love too quickly, married a man who made her raise one eyebrow at the wedding. She never said I was wrong. She just took notes I never saw. After my husband died and my daughter followed him too soon, I folded myself into my own routines. Ryan kept working, Maya grew, and Margaret stayed on the outer edge of our orbit, reliable, self-contained, visiting with casseroles and corrections. She always brought a cake for Maya's birthday, plain vanilla with strawberries on top, never peanuts. She'd memorized the allergy the first time I told her, nodding once sharply. "Children are fragile creatures," she'd said. "The world doesn't have to help." I'd taken it as concern then. Now I heard something else in it: familiarity. A gust of wind rattled the window, snapping me back to the present. Dust motes danced in the air, breaking in the sunlight like tiny ghosts. The weight of the envelope in my lap felt heavier by the minute. It was Margaret's last word, and last words have teeth. I slipped the letter back into the drawer for a moment and picked up the smaller key again, the one labeled Maya. It was attached to a thin ring, and the tag was made from a piece of an old recipe card, trimmed neat. I turned it over, nothing on the back. Somewhere in this house, there was another lock waiting, something my sister had meant for my granddaughter long after she knew she wouldn't be around to give it to her in person. That realization pinched something in my chest. For all her distance, Margaret had planned for a future she wouldn't see. That meant she'd had time to think about what she wanted to carry forward. Not just money or furniture, but something else, a message, a warning, maybe both. I stood slowly, my knees protesting the way old houses do in winter. The room changed angle when I did, as if I were seeing it for the first time. The framed photographs on her dresser, our parents on their wedding day, the two of us in matching Sunday dresses, me squinting, her already composed, a faded picture of Margaret and a man I didn't recognize, his arm around her shoulders, his face turned slightly away from the camera. I'd never seen that one before. "Who were you, Margaret?" I whispered, when I wasn't looking. The key in my palm felt like an answer I hadn't earned yet. I walked through the house slowly, listening for the creak of floorboards that had known us as girls. Every piece of furniture had its own history. The china cabinet that survived 3 moves and 1 shattered marriage. The bookshelf sagging under the weight of mysteries and biographies. The hallway table with the water ring from a glass she'd spilled the night she called me, drunk and heartbroken, and then pretended for years she'd never called at all. If there was another lock, my sister would have hidden it somewhere ordinary. That was her way. Secrets in plain sight, concealed by routine. I thought of the places she used every day. The pantry, the linen closet, the old wardrobe in the guest room. And then it came to me, the trunk at the foot of her bed, the one she always kept closed, saying it was just old linens and junk. I returned to the bedroom, studying the trunk as if it might speak. The brass latch was tarnished, the wood scarred from decades of use. There, beside the main hinge, was a small keyhole I'd never noticed, disguised by an ornate pattern in the metal. I knelt slowly, the floor cool against my knees, and brought the little key to it. It slid in smoothly, like it had been waiting for my hand, not hers. The key turned with a small sigh, like something relieved to finally breathe again. The lid creaked as I lifted it, dust shaking loose in soft little clouds. Inside, folded with the precision of Margaret's entire life, were linens, carefully stacked, each sheet a shade of fading white. But beneath them, under a layer of cedar paper, there was a wooden box about the size of a loaf of bread. The smell hit me first, old perfume and metal, faintly sweet and unsettling. I pulled the box out, set it on the floor, and wiped a palm over the lid. Carved into it was a single word, home. Margaret had never been sentimental. She didn't buy keepsakes or engrave words for comfort. Seeing that carving made my stomach turn, not from fear, but from knowing she'd chosen it deliberately. The hinges groaned when I opened it. Inside lay a collection of small, ordinary things. A rosary missing its cross, a silver locket, an envelope sealed with red wax, and an old photograph of two young women standing in front of a white house. One of them was Margaret, 20, radiant. The other woman wasn't me. I touched the edge of the photograph. The unknown woman had the same dark hair, the same sharp smile Margaret used to hide behind. On the back of the photo, written faintly in pencil, was M&L, 1962, the house by the lake. I'd never heard of an L, and I'd certainly never heard of a house by any lake. The locket was heavier than it looked, tarnished in the corners. I pressed the clasp and it opened easily. Inside was a picture of that same woman, L, and beside it a small curl of baby's hair, blonde, almost white. My throat tightened. Margaret never had children, or so I thought. I reached for the wax-sealed envelope. My hands trembled so badly that I almost tore the paper. Inside was a single sheet of lined stationery, folded twice. The ink had bled slightly, but the handwriting was unmistakably hers. Evelyn, if you're reading this, I've gone first. I didn't want you to find out from anyone else. The girl in the photo is Laura. We lived together for a few years after I left home. There was a child, Evelyn, a boy. He didn't live long. His name was Matthew. No one ever knew. I told Mother I'd been traveling for work. I told everyone else nothing at all. I thought secrets would rot if you buried them deep enough. I was wrong. The locket is his. The house papers are in the bottom of this box. I left them in Maya's name because I wanted at least one child in this family to inherit something that isn't silence. Forgive me for locking it away. I didn't trust myself not to forget. Margaret. The paper fluttered in my hands. I had to sit down before the air left my chest. The room seemed to shrink, every wall folding closer. I stared at the locket again, the curl of hair inside. Margaret, My perfect, rigid sister had lived an entire life beneath ours, one of loss and shame and fierce hidden love. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. I could almost hear her voice, calm, clipped, the way she'd always sounded when she said something that mattered. Children are fragile creatures. I thought she meant everyone else's children. I hadn't realized she'd been talking about her own. The house by the lake. My fingers dug through the rest of the box until I found another envelope, deed papers, old and yellowed, with Margaret's name scrawled across them, and underneath, a newer document transferring ownership to Maya Monroe, witnessed and notarized. The edges of grief and shock tangled together until I couldn't tell one from the other. Margaret's secret child had died, and she'd left what remained of him, his memory, his home, to mine, a circle closing decades late. I sat on the floor until the light in the room shifted from gold to gray. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of rain against the windows, gentle but insistent, as if reminding me that silence never stays buried forever. I folded the letter back into its envelope and whispered, "I forgive you, Maggie, but you should have told me." Then I picked up the smaller key again, the one marked Maya. For the first time, I understood it wasn't meant for me to use. It was meant to be passed down, like the truth she'd been too afraid to say aloud. I placed the key on the desk beside the letter, the brass glinting softly in the dying light. Somewhere downstairs, the clock struck 6, each chime a small, measured heartbeat, echoing through the empty house. I wasn't sure yet what to tell Ryan, or Maya, but I knew I couldn't pretend this drawer had stayed locked for a reason anymore. Margaret hadn't been trying to protect us from pain. She'd been protecting herself from remembering. And maybe, after all these years, it was time one of us learned how to remember properly. The next morning, I returned to Margaret's house before the lawyer arrived. Dawn spilled pale light through the lace curtains, laying soft stripes across the wooden floor. The air was sharp with that familiar blend of lemon polish and dust, the scent of a home that had been tidy for decades but not truly lived in. I carried the wooden box and the letter downstairs, placing them on the kitchen table like evidence at a quiet trial. Every sound in the house echoed, the hum of the refrigerator, the click of my shoes, the creak of the back door as I let the morning breeze in. It felt strange to be the only living heartbeat in a place that had held so many ghosts. I unfolded the letter again, reading the lines until they blurred. A boy named Matthew. I tried to picture him, a face, a laugh, anything, but my memory offered only the shadow of my sister at 20, radiant and private. I'd been away in college then, too consumed with my own life to notice her absences. I remembered a postcard from Chicago, a vague mention of work, the kind that could mean anything. I'd thought nothing of it. How easy it is to overlook the people we think we already understand. A car pulled into the driveway, tires crunching over gravel. Ryan stepped out, his jacket unbuttoned, eyes still swollen from sleep. "Mom," he called, "you left early." "In the kitchen," I said. He stopped when he saw the open box and the letter. "What's all this?" I gestured for him to sit. "It's your aunt's handwriting. There's something you need to read." He scanned the pages slowly, lips tightening. When he reached the part about Matthew, he looked up, disbelief flickering across his face. "She had a child?" "Yes." "And she never told anyone?" "She told this letter," I said quietly. He rubbed his forehead, processing. "And the property? She left it to Maya?" I nodded. "The house by the lake. She must have kept it all these years." Ryan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "This changes how I think about her, about a lot of things." "It changes how I think about myself," I admitted. I spent a lifetime believing she was the strong one, the one who did everything right. But maybe she was just better at hiding the cracks. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, a pair of sparrows darted past the window, arguing in quick bursts of sound. Life, indifferent to revelation, went on. "Are you going to tell Maya?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, "but someday she'll need to know. Secrets don't vanish, they wait. Better she hears it from me than from a box years from now." He nodded slowly. "What do we do with the property?" I smiled faintly. "We visit it, see what kind of place she wanted Maya to have. Maybe we'll find a piece of her there." He exhaled, long and low. "You really think she wanted forgiveness?" "I think she wanted peace," I said. "And sometimes peace looks like telling the truth, even when no one's around to hear it." The lawyer arrived soon after, a polite man in a gray suit, his voice too soft for this kind of day. We signed papers, confirmed inventories, pretended the world was simple. He didn't notice the box on the table. Maybe I wanted it that way. When he left, the house felt even emptier, as though Margaret had truly departed this time, her secrets finally unspooled. I carried the box to the car, tucking it gently on the passenger seat. The drive to the lake took less than an hour. The road wound through fields of yellow weeds and fading barns. I remembered summers as children when we'd bike for hours, pretending to run away, only to come home to the smell of stew and the sound of our mother's radio. Margaret had always been the first to stop, to turn back. I'd laughed at her then, called her cautious. Now I wondered if she'd been returning to more than just dinner. When the trees opened to reveal the lake, I had to pull over. The house stood at the edge of the water, small and gray, its paint blistered by decades of weather. Curtains fluttered in the broken windows like breath. But beneath the decay, there was beauty, a kind of humble dignity in the way it still faced the water, refusing to fall. I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching beneath my shoes. The air smelled of rain and pine needles. Waves lapped gently against the rocks, steady and patient. I imagined Margaret standing here, younger, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket, whispering promises into the wind. The front door hung open, just enough to creak. I hesitated, then stepped inside. Dust lay thick across the floorboards, footprints long vanished. In the living room, a faded quilt was draped over a chair. On the mantel sat a rusted tin box and a photograph in a frame, Margaret and that same woman, Laura, smiling in front of the house. I ran a finger over the glass, tracing the outline of their faces. The past was everywhere, layered like paint. Joy, loss, secrecy, love. It clung to the walls the way memories cling to the living. There was one more drawer in the corner, a narrow desk, smaller than the one at home. I didn't need to check it, but I did anyway. It was empty, except for a note scrawled in pencil. "If Evelyn finds this, tell her I kept the promise." My throat closed. I looked around the little room, at the dust dancing in the afternoon light, and whispered, "You did, Maggie, you did." Outside, the lake shimmered like a mirror, reflecting a sky already beginning to heal. The lake was still that afternoon, smooth as glass. I stood by the water's edge for a long time, listening to the soft lap of waves against the rocks. There was a quiet dignity in that sound, the same kind of peace I imagined Margaret had been searching for when she first bought this place. The house behind me groaned in the wind, boards settling like an old body sighing into rest. Ryan arrived just before sunset. His car crunched up the gravel path, the tires throwing dust over the tall grass. He stepped out, squinting toward the water. "So this is it," he said, walking beside me. "The house from her letter." "Yes," I said, "the one she left for Maya." He looked around, the chipped paint, the tilted chimney, the vines crawling up the porch rail. "It's not much to look at." It doesn't have to be, I said. It's a memory, not a monument. We walked inside together. The air smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I showed him the photo on the mantel, the note on the desk. He studied them in silence, then ran a hand along the dusty wall. She lived here, he murmured. Loved here. She lost here too, I said softly. That's what this house remembers. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. What do you want to do with it? I want to keep it for Maya, I said. When she's old enough, I'll tell her the story. Not as gossip, but as truth. She deserves to know where her name was written before she was born. Ryan nodded, his jaw tight. Secrets like this, they eat at a family. Yes, I said, but so does silence. Margaret kept both too long. We found a pair of lawn chairs on the porch and sat while the sky turned from gold to violet. The water caught the light, scattering it in ribbons across the surface. It reminded me of the nightlights we used to chase as children, those little reflections you could never hold, only admire. Mom, Ryan said after a while, do you think she was ashamed? I think she was afraid, I said. Afraid of losing control, of being judged, of watching something she loved get taken away. We all do foolish things when fear is our compass. He was quiet for a moment. And Laura? I don't know, I said, but the way she's looking at Margaret in that photo, there's love there. That's enough. A breeze lifted the edge of the roof's tin, making it rattle softly. Ryan leaned back, eyes closed. It's strange, he said. I thought I knew my aunt. All those holidays, all those years, and she was living a whole different story. Maybe that's true for most of us, I said. We think we're watching people's lives, but we're really just seeing their highlights. The real stories live in the locked drawers. He gave a small, tired smile. You sound like one of your old church readings. Maybe I'm just old enough to mean it, I said. The sun dipped lower. Across the water, the first streetlights began to blink on. For a moment, I imagined Margaret here, sitting in this same chair, the sound of waves at her feet, a baby's soft cry in the distance. Maybe she'd looked at this lake the way I was looking at it now, trying to measure how much guilt it could hold before it overflowed. Ryan stood, brushing off his jeans. We should head back soon. It's getting dark. Go on ahead, I said. I'll lock up. He hesitated, then nodded and walked to the car. I stayed on the porch a few minutes longer, the box resting on my lap. Inside were the pieces of her life, the rosary, the letter, the locket, the deed. I traced the edge of the tag that said Maya and whispered her name like a prayer. From the car, Ryan called out, "You coming?" "In a minute," I said. He left the engine running, headlights sweeping across the porch. I stood and carried the box inside. The light caught the dust again, tiny gold sparks drifting in the air. I set the box back on the mantel beside the photograph of Margaret and Laura. "You can rest now," I said quietly. "We found you." Then I blew the dust from the frame until their smiles looked new again. As I closed the door behind me, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, yes, but softer somehow. Margaret's secrets had been heavy, but revealing them didn't break me. It made space inside me for forgiveness. When I reached the car, Ryan was watching me. "You okay?" "I think so," I said. "It's strange. The truth doesn't hurt as much as the years we spent pretending not to look for it." He nodded, started the car, and we drove away down the narrow road. In the rearview mirror, the lake house shrank to a speck, its single window glowing faintly like an ember that refused to die out. As we turned the last corner, I whispered to myself, "Rest easy, Maggie. The drawer's open now." The next few days felt oddly hollow, as if the world itself was catching its breath. I returned home with the box locked safely in my desk and the key marked Maya hanging on a thin ribbon above it. Every time I passed that desk, I caught a glimpse of the brass glinting in the light and felt both comfort and weight. Secrets don't vanish once they're spoken, they just change shape. Ryan called often, mostly to talk about practical things, the legal transfer, the cost of repairs for the lake house, how to keep the story private for now. But beneath his words, I could hear something softer, the sound of a man who had finally realized that his family's history wasn't as tidy as he'd believed. We all have to face that moment sooner or later. That Thursday evening, Maya found the ribbon. "Grandma," she said, holding the key between her fingers, "what's this for?" I hesitated. The truth was there on the tip of my tongue, but she was too young for the whole story. "It's from Aunt Margaret," I said gently. "She wanted you to have it when you're older." "Older like you?" she asked, smiling. "Older, like patient," I said, and that seemed to satisfy her. She twirled the key once, giggled at the way it caught the light, then set it back carefully on the desk. That night, after she went to bed, I sat in the quiet kitchen with a cup of tea and Margaret's letter spread out on the table. I read it again and again until the words became less about confession and more about apology. It struck me how much courage it must have taken for her to write it at all. We'd grown up in a time when certain truths weren't allowed to breathe. Love had rules and shame had teeth. Margaret had broken both. The phone rang. Ryan again. His voice was tired but lighter somehow. "I talked to the lawyer," he said. "The deed's officially under Maya's name now. The house is hers." "Good," I said softly. "It's where she'll learn that silence doesn't last forever." He was quiet for a beat. "Mom, do you think Margaret wanted you to find that drawer, or was it just chance?" "Maybe both," I said. "Maybe she trusted me to disobey her warning." He chuckled faintly. "That sounds like you." We said our goodnights, and when I hung up, the house settled into that deep, contented stillness that only old houses know. I carried the box back to the living room and placed it on the coffee table. There, beneath the lamplight, I opened it one last time. The scent of cedar rose again, and I ran my fingers over the locket. The small curl of hair inside gleamed pale under the light. "Matthew," I whispered, testing the name on my tongue. It felt both foreign and familiar. "You existed. You mattered." I thought of Margaret's phrase in the letter. I didn't trust myself not to forget. That line lingered like an ache. Forgetting was her sin. Remembering, it seemed, was mine to bear. The clock struck 9. I took out my own journal, the one where I'd been writing stories for Maya to read when she's older. Stories of recipes, small miracles, lessons learned from the quiet corners of ordinary days. I opened to a blank page and began writing. There was once a drawer that stayed locked for 60 years. Inside it lived a letter, a photograph, and the truth about two sisters who thought silence was safer than love. The pen moved easily after that. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the tea went cold, until the house itself seemed to exhale with me. When I finished, I folded Margaret's letter inside my journal. The two pieces of handwriting, hers and mine, sat together on the page like a conversation that had waited half a lifetime to happen. Before bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth from a late-night drizzle. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's wind chime tinkled in the dark. I looked up at the sky, a wide spread of stars over the black silhouette of trees, and felt, for the first time in weeks, something like peace. Forgiveness doesn't erase what's broken. It just teaches you how to hold the pieces without bleeding. Inside, I turned off the lights and paused at the desk. The key to the locked drawer sat next to the one marked Maya. I tied them together with the blue thread from Margaret's envelope and placed them in the top drawer. Some locks, I thought, are meant to stay closed, not out of fear, but because what's inside has already been set free. The keys clinked softly against each other as I closed the drawer, a small, final lullaby for everything we'd uncovered. The following weekend, Ryan and I drove back to the lake house, not for answers this time, but to clean it, to let it breathe again. The road curved through the hills like a ribbon, and the late spring air carried that faint, wet sweetness that comes after rain. The box rode in the back seat, wrapped in a quilt. I'd stopped thinking of it as evidence. It felt more like a guest who deserved a proper goodbye. When we arrived, the house looked gentler than it had before, as if time itself had softened its edges. Wildflowers had sprung up near the porch steps, yellow and white and defiantly alive. Ryan parked under the old elm tree, and we stepped out into silence, broken only by the call of a loon across the lake. Inside, dust had settled again, but the air was lighter. We opened every window, letting the breeze rush through the rooms. Curtains flapped like slow applause. I found a broom in the closet and began sweeping, while Ryan cleared cobwebs from the ceiling. It felt almost ceremonial, as though by cleaning we were restoring something Margaret had wanted but never managed to finish. When the sun reached its highest point, we took a break and sat on the porch steps with sandwiches and coffee. Ryan looked out across the water. "You ever think about how many things we inherit that we never asked for?" he said. "All the time," I replied, "but we also inherit the chance to do better." He nodded. "I used to think family was about blood. Now I think it's about repair." "Repair takes more love than resemblance," I said. A gentle wind stirred the trees. Across the lake, the surface shimmered like glass. I imagined Margaret sitting in that same spot decades ago, holding the baby she couldn't keep, staring at this same water, and wondering what kind of future would forgive her. We spent the afternoon sorting through the drawers and cabinets. Most of it was junk, rusted spoons, cracked teacups, old calendars. But in one of the kitchen drawers, tucked beneath a dish towel, I found a stack of letters wrapped in twine. The top envelope was addressed to E. Monroe, never mailed. I froze. "Ryan," I said softly, "come look at this." He wiped his hands and joined me. I handed him the letters. The top one was dated 1985, long after Margaret had returned home. He opened it carefully. "Dear Evelyn, I came to see you last Christmas, but couldn't bring myself to knock. You looked happy through the window, laughing with your husband and daughter. I told myself that was enough, to see you living the life I couldn't. But I miss you. I miss how easy it used to be your sister. Maybe someday I'll tell you everything. Maybe you'll understand why I kept things locked away. Until then, know this. You were always the brave one. Not because you never feared anything, but because you always faced it." The words blurred as Ryan's voice cracked on the last line. I reached for the letter and touched the edge of the paper, fragile as onion skin. "She tried," I whispered. "All these years, she tried to tell me." Ryan nodded, folding the letter back carefully. "Maybe she didn't know how." "None of us did," I said. "We were raised to believe feelings were untidy things, best folded and put away." We bundled the rest of the letters together and placed them inside the wooden box. When I closed the lid this time, it felt final but not heavy, like sealing something that had finally found its rest. Before leaving, Ryan hammered a small brass hook into the inside of the front door frame and hung the key marked Maya there. It caught the afternoon sun, throwing a soft shimmer against the wall. "For her," he said. I smiled. "For all of us." We locked up and stood for a moment, watching the wind ripple across the lake. The water sparkled in streaks of silver, and somewhere far off, a bird rose from the reeds and vanished into the sky. On the drive home, neither of us spoke for a long time. The road wound through green fields, the air full of the smell of wild mint and damp earth. Somewhere between the turns, I realized my chest didn't ache anymore. The grief was still there, yes, but quieter, like a song remembered from another room. Ryan glanced at me. "You okay?" "I think we both are," I said. "Margaret's story doesn't end in guilt. It ends in inheritance, not of land or money, but of honesty." He smiled faintly. "That's worth more than the house." I turned to watch the horizon fade behind us, and it'll last longer. When we reached the main road, the sun had dipped low enough to gild the edges of the trees. The lake was already out of sight, but its calm stayed with me. I could still hear the waves lapping softly, a reminder that the past, once spoken, doesn't drown us. It teaches us how to float. The morning after our visit to the lake house, I woke earlier than usual. The house was still, wrapped in that fragile silence that only comes before sunrise. I brewed coffee and sat by the kitchen window, watching the world shift from gray to gold. For the first time in weeks, I felt light. Not because everything was resolved, grief never grants that, but because the truth was finally out where it could breathe. On the table beside me sat Margaret's box, now half empty. The locket rested on top of the folded letters, its chain coiled like a sleeping snake. I'd cleaned it the night before, and now it caught the sun, glinting softly. I reached out, running my thumb over the small curl of blonde hair inside. "Matthew," I said his name aloud. It felt strange and sacred, like praying to someone you never met but somehow love anyway. Ryan stopped by mid-morning, carrying croissants and a hesitant smile. Maya trailed behind him, her braids uneven, her shoes untied. "Breakfast rescue," he said, placing the bag on the counter. Maya spotted the box immediately. "Is that Aunt Margaret's treasure?" she asked. I chuckled. "Something like that." She climbed into a chair. "Daddy says she left me a house. Does that mean I'm rich?" Ryan laughed. "Not rich, kiddo, but it's a very special place." Maya looked at me expectantly. "Can we go there?" "Someday," I said, pouring her milk, "when you're older and ready to keep it safe." Her brow furrowed. "Why would a house need me to keep it safe?" "Because it holds memories," I said, "and memories need careful people." She nodded as if that made perfect sense, then dunked her croissant into her milk and grinned. Ryan caught my eye, amusement softening his features. For that small moment, the air between us felt easy again. After breakfast, he helped me in the garden. The soil was dark and damp, and the scent of rosemary clung to our hands. Maya ran around chasing butterflies, her laughter echoing through the yard. I thought about Margaret again. How different her life might have been if she'd allowed herself this kind of noise, this kind of chaos and love. As we worked, Ryan said quietly, "You were right about telling the truth. It hurts, but it's cleaner than silence." "Truth always costs something," I said, "but it pays interest and peace." He smiled at that. "You should write that down in your journal of quotes." I wiped sweat from my forehead. "Already did." We finished the garden beds by noon. Before they left, I handed Ryan a sealed envelope. "For the lawyer," I said, "I've included a copy of Margaret's letter and the deed transfer. I want everything kept official, so Maya never has to question where it came from." He nodded, sliding it into his jacket. "You sure you're ready to let go of it?" "Yes," I said, "but I'll keep the story. That's the part worth holding." When they drove away, I stayed outside, watching their car shrink down the road until it disappeared. The afternoon sun was bright but kind. Somewhere a neighbor's wind chime tinkled. I walked back into the house, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat once more at the desk. The keys, both of them, lay on the surface, tied together with the blue thread. I untied them and placed one in my jewelry box, the one marked Maya. The other I slipped onto a chain and fastened around my neck. A quiet promise between sisters. She'd trusted me to open what she couldn't, and now I'd carry it until Maya was old enough to know. Later that evening, I wrote in my journal again. "Every family has locked drawers. Some stay shut because they hold pain, others because they hold love too fragile to touch. But truth doesn't live or die in silence. It waits for someone brave enough to turn the key. I closed a book and set it beside the box. Outside, the light was fading, painting the room in that amber hue Margaret used to call the hour of forgiveness. I walked to the window. The world was quiet, but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a confession, tender, restorative, alive. I thought about the lake, the house, the photograph, the hidden letters, and all the years they'd waited. Maybe we all have a drawer somewhere inside us, one we're afraid to unlock. But I learned something Margaret never had the chance to. The moment you turn the key, the ghosts stop whispering. They start to rest. The sun slipped behind the trees. I whispered her name into the stillness. "Good night, Maggie. You can rest now." And for the first time in a very long while, so could I. There's a kind of silence that follows truth, not the heavy quiet of shame, but the soft hush of release. That's what filled the house in the days that followed. It was as if Margaret's story had been waiting all along for someone to give it sound, to breathe it back into the world one word at a time. I used to think family meant what we shared, the meals, the laughter, the old photographs fading on the mantle. But now I know it's just as much about what we uncover, the locked drawers, the untold stories, the mistakes we inherit and choose to mend. Love isn't only keeping each other safe. Sometimes it's daring to look into the places no one else will. Margaret's key hangs by my kitchen window now, catching light every morning. It reminds me that secrecy doesn't protect us. It just waits, like a door half closed, hoping someone brave will turn the handle. When Maya grows old enough, I'll tell her everything, not as a warning, but as proof that honesty survives longer than fear. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the truth will outlive us whether we face it or not. Better to meet it with open hands and a steady heart. Because the moment we open what's been locked away, we don't just free the past, we free ourselves. Before you go, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether your family ever carried a secret that changed everything once it was told. And if this story spoke to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, not just to hear more of Grandma Evelyn's stories, but to remind yourself that some locks aren't meant to stay closed forever. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is open the drawer.